Well, good afternoon, everybody. We are so excited to have you, our alumni, join us this afternoon, and I'm really excited to turn this over. I'm sorry we're starting a little bit late, so I'm going to get through my remarks very quickly and turn this over to this fantastic panel so that you all can learn from them. My name is Mary Beth Brueggemann. For those of you that I don't know, I am the president of the Mission Continues. I am a Marine Corps veteran. I served for 8 years on active duty and have been with the Mission Continues now for about 6 years, and in this role as president for about 1.5 years. And during that time, I've had incredible opportunities to interact with so many of our program participants and so many of our incredible alumni. And I think we can widely say across the organization and definitely across the leadership that we consider our alumni to be one of our most precious and valuable assets at the Mission Continues. You all have given so much of your heart and your souls and your time and your resources to this organization. And we are now working very, very hard to ensure that we are giving you back that and so much more. We really want to find ways for you all to be able to continue and extend your journey with us. If you've served with us through our programs, if you've led our service platoons, attended mass deployments, been a fellow, contributed to our blog, in so many ways, been part of our alumni giving circle. There are so many opportunities to continue serving with us, and we're constantly looking for ways to ensure that we're providing additional pathways for you to not only just join us in service, which you can always do through your local service platoons, but continue your leadership with us as well, and upskill and grow and feel like the Mission Continues can be your home where you can consistently do that. One of the people who's done that so well with us over the years is Derek, and I'm so excited to bring him into this conversation to facilitate a panel about board leadership and leadership. And we have two incredible women joining us who, in the other side of my work, I have had an opportunity to spend so much time with both Sally and Nana and learn from them and their experience and their leadership. And it's been such a great joy and a pleasure and a privilege to be able to serve alongside them and bring in their voices and their experience to help build the leadership of this organization and lead us on a path forward that is sustainable, and it's for the future. And they bring so much passion to this work that we've all benefited incredibly from. So as we think about adding, and we look to add an alumni of our programs to our board to bring in that perspective and that voice, I'm very excited just to have this conversation today to introduce you all, for those of you who are new to considering board leadership, and just want to learn a little bit more about how our board members choose to lead in their own lives. We're just happy to have you here. So Charlie, Mike, and with that, I will pass on to Derek. Derek, thank you so much for being here, and I can't wait to observe and watch. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mary Beth. Welcome, everyone. Thank you, Mary Beth, for your leadership, especially in this past year. It's been a trying time, and for you to lead this organization and steer it so that it's still relevant, viable, and still having the type of impact that our nation needs at this moment. So thank you for your continued leadership. I am super excited to be here with Sally and Nana today to learn about their leadership, to learn about their role inside of being on the board of directors and what does that mean. Before I get into that, though, I want to introduce myself. I could get myself out of the way and really get to hear from our two panelists. As Mary Beth mentioned, my name is Derek Auguste. I first volunteered with the Mission Continues in 2016. I was a fellow, and I was part of that fellowship program that has been sunsetted and transitioned into SLC. So I was part of that initial group. But I was also the platoon leader for the Miami's first service platoon from 2017 to 2019. During that time, I was introduced to the world of nonprofit. I was introduced to the world of veteran advocacy. I was introduced to the world of environmental stewardship, in youth programming, in so many different aspects that has shaped me into who I am today. Currently, I work for a national nonprofit called the Warrior Scholar Project that helps veterans make that transition from the military to higher education. I am the Alumni Engagement and Outreach Fellow for that organization. As well as I do sit on a couple boards myself. One is with the United Way of Miami-Dade County, Mission United, as well as another nonprofit called the Veterans Trust. But without further ado, you're not here to hear me speak. You're here to see these incredible, incredible women speak. So I'm going to ask them to briefly introduce themselves. If Nana, if you please take a moment to introduce yourself, and then we'll go over to Sally.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Derek. And thank you to everyone for taking the time to join us today. I'm super excited to have this conversation. So my name is Nana Adae. I chair the board, and I have been with the Mission Continues now for coming up 8 years. I've been on the board for a while. And so I have been able to watch the transformation, the metamorphosis that Derek talked about. When I got here, it was just fellowship programs and platoons. I am a Navy veteran, 7 years active duty. I was a cryptologist in the Navy. And I have been out for a very, very long time, very long. And I work in finance. I work in the corporate environment. So for me, it's been wonderful to have military service and leadership in my life, but also to have had civilian leadership opportunities, but then also to have volunteer leadership opportunities. So I think this will be a great conversation. Sally.
Thanks so much, Nana, and thank you, Derek, for having me here. Hi, everyone. I'm Sally Chen. I'm a proud board member of the Mission Continues, and I feel like I'm the newest ad, maybe, within the past year. So definitely just such a pleasure being among such an incredible company. In my day job, I work in social impact and have been doing so for over 20 years, all within the entertainment industry. So this conversation hits very close to home. I'm also a proud military spouse, so I'm learning, learning about the journey that you all go through, and a proud supporter of Mission Continues before I joined the board.
Awesome, awesome. So we're just going to jump right into the questions. And I do want to let everyone know that in this webinar format, please, you can submit questions. We have some questions that we really want to get into, but we do want to reserve time at the end to answer any questions that you pose. So please use the Q&A feature within the webinar in order to make sure that your questions get put in queue. And then we'll make sure we have some time left over to answer them live. And if not, I think Talisa is planning on putting together a Q&A document that will go out later on. So even if we don't get a chance to answer it live, I think Sally and Nana have agreed to make sure they write down or do some follow-up answers for you. So jumping right into it, and I think what's really great is that both of you have had experience with the Mission Continues volunteer leadership and kind of that experience of volunteer leadership. So I want to ask you in terms of how can professional development, similar to the Mission Continues programs that you're familiar with, help you become a leader in your field or community? So I'd like to start with Sally first, to give her a chance to answer this question. So, how can professional development, similar to the type of experience and leadership experience that you've gotten through the Mission Continues, help you become a better leader in your field or community?
That's a great question. I always feel like, the question is, right, like, how do you get into volunteerism? And I always believe that it's modeled for you, right? I know for myself, growing up, I'd obviously see my parents like volunteering at the church or, helping a neighbor. And I know, especially during COVID, everyone's like, well, I can't leave my house. I can't volunteer, because we've somehow pivoted the conversation where it's just this formalized thing that only a few people do kind of in their spare time. And I was like, volunteerism is just how you show up, right, in your neighborhood, in your communities. And I think when we talk about how that relates to professional development, it's that, right? Leaders need to understand different scenarios, need to understand how all of the players work together, what your role is kind of in that larger sort of ecosystem. And so I think anywhere you can get that type of exposure, development. I like volunteerism because I always feel like it's a safe space to test things out, to find your voice, to understand what gifts kind of and experiences and the lens that you bring to a situation, and then adapt that to every other situation that you find yourself in, whether professionally or personally.
Great. Nana, yeah, the same question to you. How has the leadership, from you seeing the leadership programs, the Mission Continues, you said you've seen kind of the metamorphosis of the leadership programs. How do you see those kind of marrying with your professional development and the experience you've had in serving and being a leader in your field or community?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have to sell this group on the merits of the professional development since you're all alum, but I will say that when I got out of the military, I had been taught a formula, and it worked for the things that I needed to do. And so when I look back on just sort of all the different experiences I had, if I hadn't gone into trainings and different types of development programs, whether it was at work or something like what we do here, to really start to hone a new level of skills as I was actually leveling up as a leader. And as Sally said, you're seeing different situations. I think I would have been, I just think I would have been unprepared, and I wouldn't have been as creative as I've become. Like, I always tell people, I think that people in the military are some of the most creative people ever. They just think that all we do is take orders, and everyone's just like a robot. But the truth of the matter is, we often have to solve these really tough problems with like less resources than we thought we were going to get, and in just sort of really uncomfortable types of situations, right? And so that makes you incredibly resilient and creative, I think. But I also think that every new situation, especially when we're going out in our communities, especially when we're going into different organizations, requires, another little toolkit. And so I think that professional development and like kind of that continued professional development is actually vital for people who love leadership, right? Because you can always learn more, and that you're running into a situation that you haven't seen before. And so if you can get those extra tools in your toolkit, I think it's vital.
Fantastic. And I think, I mean, and thinking back too, right? I mean, there's always this notion of kind of like putting yourself in this experience to continue to grow and develop and things of that nature. But specifically to this audience, us being all alumni of a Mission Continues program, I do want to kind of touch upon what your thoughts are of that term, alumni, and what kind of responsibility you envision an alumni to have, right? I know both of you are very involved in different alumni associations. And so I'd like to ask you, kind of touch upon, what type of alumni engagement are you currently involved in, number one? And number two, like the real big question is like, why? Like, why as an alum, like you got what you got, you did what you did, and, on to the next thing. Why give back? Why, continue to be engaged with an organization? So I'd like to start with Nana this time, if that's okay. Nana, you first. To kind of talk about, what alumni programs you're involved in, and
Sure.
and the why behind it. Yeah.
Sure. So I went to the Naval Academy, and so I sit on the alumni and foundation board because I've worked in finance for a number of years. I actually sit on the finance committee. So with just a particular expertise I brought to that particular role. Why do I do it? Yeah, because it is another meeting. It's more stuff to read, and it's more stuff to do. But I would say that my board involvement that's actually stuck the longest and been most fulfilling for me has been something that I am connected with. That sort of like by definition, I am an alum, and I care about other issues too. And those have actually been a little bit more kind of spotty volunteerism at times. But the things that have actually been the most, central in my life, and the things that I've actually said yes to have been that alum piece. I think one, I do feel a sense of responsibility to the organization to like do something else, right? Like I got a lot from the Naval Academy. And so if I can now give something back as they, look to steward their endowment funds and, create programming for our midshipmen, and also think about supporting our alum, like I'm happy to do it, because I definitely got a lot. But I would also say that when you're not currently in the organization, you've got great perspective. And it gives you a great vantage point to be able to give a perspective that maybe people who are sitting in the organization don't often see. But the thing that I love about it, because these organizations are dear to me, I give that perspective with real care and love, right? Like there's something about being like an issue spotter where you're just like, you're doing this wrong. Nobody cares about that anymore. Like, that's what the way they used to do it 20 years ago. And that's just not helpful, right? But because I love the mission and the cause, I just think I care so deeply about what I am trying to impart. And I'm just really hopeful that I'm leaving it better than I found it. So I do think that there is a little something special about being an alum and then getting involved.
Thank you, Sally. Now, you mentioned in your introduction that you spend a lot of your time in the entertainment industry. Do you still kind of, is there an overlap between your professional experience and your alumni involvement? Similar to what Nana was talking about, being in the financial sector, kind of being in the financial, bringing that level of expertise. Is that something similar for you as well, or are you doing something different?
Yeah, absolutely. So I work in public affairs, specifically in community engagement. So I get paid, right, to basically figure out where are the communities where we film our TV shows, film our movies, and really what kind of sort of positive impact do we have, and where can we sometimes be a nuisance, like we're shutting down streets to film a show. And so I guess how that bleeds over into the work I do on a board is, so I graduated from University of Southern California, both as an undergrad and grad, so I poured a lot of money into that school. And I think when you're a student, you're like, I just need to extract as much as I can from this university. And then, as Nana shared, you graduate and you're like, there's this deep recognition that there are other people who've sacrificed their time, their investment, their treasure to create that institution or that organization that you've chosen to opt in. So I felt that same responsibility. How do I give back? And so I sit on the advisory board of the Social Enterprise Lab. And before anyone knew what CSR was, you couldn't get a grad degree in social enterprise. There was just a club. And since then, it's turned into a master's program. And I sit on that board to help sort of steward the evolution of what this practice is. So we don't relegate like ethics to one business class, but it's an ethos in how we do business. It's something that we care about beyond just kind of writing a philanthropic check. So there's definitely a lot of intersections there in my kind of professional work and what I personally care about.
As I mentioned, I sit on a couple boards as well, and one of the boards, was United Way of Miami-Dade, Miss United, and I remember when the executive director asked me to sit on the board, like I was super apprehensive, right? I'm like, I was just a client like 3 weeks ago, right? Like I just, like you helped me save my house, and I came in here broken, right? And you helped build me up. But I said, I accepted it because he was very persuasive, and I accepted his position, and my heart was pounding, and I felt completely out of place. But there was an instance where the board was talking about cases, and they were talking about cases and how many cases and what's the percentage of cases and things of that nature. And I just remember leaning forward in the boardroom, and I just said, are we still talking about human beings? Are we still talking about people? I'm just curious because I'm hearing like a lot of numbers and percentages and things of that nature. And that was kind of my experience. That's kind of when I sat back and I was like, oh, like that's why he wanted me on the board, was to bring that perspective. As Mary Beth had mentioned, bringing an alumni to the board for the Mission Continues. I'd like to ask each of you, like, what kind of perspective would you hope an alumni to bring, and how do you think an alumni could bring that perspective to the board of directors to make it, fruitful and make it, mutually beneficial? So I'm gonna leave it up to you. I'm not gonna pick this time. I'm gonna let either one jump ahead.
Okay, I'll jump in. So I think an alumni voice would be incredibly valuable for a number of reasons, but quite honestly, because you've been there, right? Like we sit in board meetings and we talk about strategic direction. We talk about sort of tactical moves that the team is making. We're talking about changes, new things, but it all centers around you. And so the idea that we could hear directly from someone who lived through those changes, right? To get perspective about how we think about things going forward, right? This leadership team, I think, is doing an excellent job of really trying to educate and inculcate our new board members and help them understand like what it is that we do. And how powerful would it be to have somebody on the board who like went through it, right? And to sort of start slotting all of that information that board members are getting with something that's real. And so I think, Derek, just much like what you said, like sometimes you just need a different set of ears to realize that there's something that you're talking through or thinking about that just needs a different lens. And we've talked about it for a while, but I'm just super excited that we're finally at the point where we're like, great, let's have a panel and like, let's talk to people, because there's some really amazing people on our board, and I'm a little starstruck myself, to be completely honest. But what you learn on a board is that everyone is there because they love the organization. And so therefore, everyone who's there is on equal footing, right? And so that is what makes it so fun, I think, to be on the board of an organization that you really care about, is because everybody wants to hear what you have to say. And that's, I think, something that people should remember.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I completely agree. I think oftentimes you're concerned, you're like, right, people will struggle with imposter syndrome, or they're like, wait, why am I being asked to be here? And I was like, well, there's a reason. You have exactly what Nana said. You have a lens and an authenticity because you know what you've experienced. And if you're willing and show up with that courage to share, right, those experiences, that lens, then everyone benefits. I'll probably talk about this a little bit later, but at Warner Brothers, I oversee a program where we train employees to sit on nonprofit boards. And that's what we look for when we look at nonprofits that we want to introduce to our employees, is how healthy are they? How does the board reflect the people they serve? And I think that it really speaks to that. The health of an organization is when the people leading also reflect the folks that they're servicing and understand the unique experiences and challenges that they go through. So.
That's fantastic, because one of the things that we're really excited about is this announcement of the leadership opportunities for our alumni. Not only are there an opportunity to serve on the board, and I mean, for the few moments that we've had to share, like, I'm just learning so much, and I can imagine, spending an hour or so, around a board and discussing strategic ideas and thought processes, and kind of say, okay, well, where do we want this organization to go? And then what's the first step today to get us to where we want to go 5, 10, 15 years from now? So I think there's just an enormous amount of opportunity to learn, as well as this idea of an alumni committee, where you're going to have just a committee of alumni, to your point, Nana, just sharing about what that experience was like being in a program. What was it like being a platoon leader? What was it like being on a mass deployment, being in SLC, WVLP, all these different programs, and saying, okay, well, this was my experience. And to your point, Nana, it's like, I want to leave things better than how I found them, right? And it's that opportunity to give back to an organization that gave you so much, and I feel that wholeheartedly in what the Mission Continues was able to provide me, and the life that I have today is in large part to the skills and the networks and the hands that I had a chance to shake and stand next to, as a result of the Mission Continues affording me this opportunity. So and it's really exciting to see that. So now I want to kind of shift gears and ask some specific questions to each of you. So Sally, I know you sit on a couple of boards. What do you think is the most important thing a board member brings to a board when they first join? And I know you're brand new to the Mission Continues board, which is super exciting. Congratulations for you. But yeah, like, what do you think is the most important thing that a board member brings to a board when they first join?
Yeah, it's a great question. As part of like our training, what we often teach our employees who are about to join a board for the first time is recognizing why you've joined the board, sort of understanding, okay, what is it about the mission of this organization and the programs that they sort of oversee and how they show up in a community that resonates with you. And then I think as a board member, you're often asked to join a board because, one, either you have a functional expertise, one, you have an element of sort of that diversity makeup, whether it's your experience, how you're connected to the mission, and then bringing that lens into an organization. So I always treat it the same as like when you start a new job, right? It's it's nerve-wracking. You're getting to know sort of your colleagues and who's in the room and what role everyone occupies, but you know you've been hired for a reason. And so it's like you come in just trying to get an understanding of the landscape, what everyone does, why they're in it. And then it does crystallize over time where you really feel like you can add value to the conversation or the experience.
Do you have any advice? I know, there's some future board members on this call. And so would you have any advice for any of our future, whoever, somebody is going to be sitting as the alumni representative on the board of directors? What advice would you give them? As someone who's new to the board, what's some advice that you'd give to one of our alumni?
Yeah, when I consider a board, I try to meet the leadership. I try to meet some of the other board members. I may even suggest like attending a board meeting before you make that leap, because I think similar to kind of a job interview process, like you want to just kind of get an understanding of what you're signing up for, because I do believe it has to be a very intentional exercise and choice for you. But I think once you get a sense of who everybody is and why they've opted in, you kind of understand this is a team and we're all after kind of the same goal. This is the direction we're headed. And I think it makes you feel like you're part of something, right? I think that's kind of the number one reason I see that people join a board. Is like, you want to be part of something bigger and you have something to bring to that equation. And so that really has to line up in kind of in those initial introductions and meetings.
Awesome. Nana, okay, over to you. Now, you have been, as you mentioned, with the board for 8 years, and that is just, a wealth of knowledge and experience. And I mean, just thinking of all the situational knowledge you possess just from being in that role. If for our alumni that are getting ready to apply for this position and be on the board of directors, what are some things that you think helped you be successful in your 8 years as a board member, that they should start thinking about now, right, and kind of looking towards? And I think number two is what are some techniques in terms of not having as the director of the board, like you don't want to leave a vacuum, right, when it's time for you to step down and move on to bigger and brighter things. So what are the two things as an alumni stepping in, right? What should they be thinking about in terms of developing themselves for, or reflecting upon some of their experiences to prepare themselves for that board? And then on the other side of it is once they're on the board, then how do they kind of capture that situational knowledge so there isn't a vacuum when it's time for them to move on?
Yeah, so great question. So I would say first off, so Sally talks about the program that Warner Brothers has that actually prepares people for board service, which is phenomenal. So if you work at an organization that has a pretty developed kind of CSR type function, you may even be able at work to find the opportunity to get tutored on what it takes to be on a board. And there may be some like other organizations that actually run like little seminars kind of local to you. But like my favorite answer to almost any question I don't know is Google. And so you can actually also Google literally the words, what does it take to be on the board of a nonprofit, and see what comes up. And I guarantee you there's going to be like a dozen lists that have like 3 to 5 steps. And by the time you read that, you'll be like, okay, I got it. Like I can actually do that, right? And that's probably the, like G.I. Joe, knowing's half the battle, or what is it? Knowing's half the battle. What is it? So it really isn't anything that's insurmountable. It really is this kind of like assessment of your skill set, assessment of the things that you like to do and actually don't like to do, assessment of like your level of curiosity. Right? Like maybe you aren't a strategic thinker, but it's something that you're really curious about. Like what better way than to get on a board with some really strong, like functional expertise and then be around a bunch of people who are supposed to be strategic and kind of learn from that, right? Like, come in with your value, knowing that you don't have to be perfect. Not everyone on our board has the same level of expertise in anything because they're all careered people in a specific area, and we call on them when we need them, right? And like you'll have that same thing. So as far as preparation, you've got it. But there's probably a few different outlets where you can think of on how to catalog in your head what those things are. And then also just, understanding where you have those gaps that you want to fill with the experience. And then I say, when you get on the board, Sally kind of talked a bit about it too, like what it feels like to step on and to kind of watch and get a sense of just kind of the cadence and the conversations. And again, because as both of them said, you're being asked for a very specific reason, there will be that ability to Sally's new to the board, but has been like invaluable as we've thought about a lot of decisions, actually, especially in the DEI space. She's been super helpful to have that perspective and just kind of the freshness of her thought and just being like, this is what she does. And so we've called on her, and it didn't take a lot of work for her to be able to like understand how she could add value. And therefore, for someone like me who, sadly at some point is going to roll off because, you can't be on the board forever. I don't know which gap there's going to be, but I know someone like Sally is going to be like phenomenal for her tenure, however long she wants to stay with us, because we were very intentional about wanting to be able to get someone like with her skill set on our board. And so again, I think if you're being asked, it's really all about the idea of assessing and looking and seeing where those pockets are, that those skills that you have can kind of fit in. And then over time, when you're on a board, you start growing skills that you didn't have before. So it's kind of, Derek, to your that question about like, making sure that there are no gaps. You start to grow into some of those things, and hopefully board service is something where it is about growth, right? It isn't just about you giving, it's about you also getting something out of it. It's kind of like that professional development question that we started with. And so I think it's a very organic way, if you're really like sort of honest and passionate about the work, for you to very easily be able to like slip into some of those spots. And if there are some gaps, you're excited and feel empowered enough to say like, oh, hey, I think we have a gap here. And then like you as a board, like go and try to fill it, right? So I hope that answered the question, but yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. And I think, I just want to pause in here one second, kind of plug in here, kind of like, what does a typical like board member day look like, right? Like what is like a certain time commitment or, an expectation, for a board member? Because I know boards operate very differently and things of that nature, but I think one of the apprehensions might be, do I have the time, right? Do I have the time to invest in doing this? And I want to give it 100% of myself. And so I just kind of wanted to ask you if you have any insights
Sure.
on how you manage life and, being so involved, with the different nonprofits you're a part of and the associations and things of that nature.
Yeah. So when Sally asked me the same question when she was interviewing us about whether or not she wanted to join the board, I gave this answer. So everyone, right, has a full, they've got a gig. So whether it is like your family that is your full-time gig, whether it is like someone who pays you outside of your home is your full-time gig, like board service is not your full-time gig. And each organization is going to have different levels of engagement expectation, for sure. Some people are going to try to make it kind of like your full-time gig. And if that like floats your boat, then you should go do those organizations. Me personally, that's actually not how it works for me. So for us, just like a day in the life, we have quarterly meetings. And that's when the entire board gets together to talk about a docket of things. And we've gotten information from the leadership team beforehand to read through so that we have like a sense of like what's going on. But I will say that probably once or twice, because we do sit on committees, we may be called on to do like a committee meeting, kind of like off cycle from the quarter. Or for example, Mary Beth, Sally, and I got on the when we wanted to interview, a potential new partner for the organization. And so we just kind of set that up on the calendar and kind of talk. And so it can be very ad hoc, but it's never anything that is just like, wow, I can't manage this. Like you kind of ask all those questions going in and you understand like how much work. Now, as the board chair, I probably do maybe a little bit more just because I'm a little bit more connected with Mary Beth on a regular basis, and the rest of the executive team. But I would say for the most part, to be on the board of the Mission Continues is most solidly a quarterly engagement type affair with, with some pre-work and some attention, off cycle a bit, but not overwhelming by a lot of board standards.
That's good to know. That's good to know. Sally, do you have a take on how it's been for you, kind of being on the board with the Mission Continues, and kind of like, did it meet your expectations in terms of what you were getting into in terms of time commitment and things of that nature, as you were making your decision to accept the appointment?
Okay, I'll air muffs so you can.
No, absolutely. Meet and exceed. I mean, I've always been a fan of the Mission Continues just as a volunteer and as a corporate sponsor. But I think joining the board and understanding how it works, how Mary Beth, the leadership really just are so thoughtful in every decision that they make. And so I knew just the first meeting, I was like, I've made a good choice. I somehow, even with 2 toddlers, I've managed to join 4 or 5 nonprofit boards. And I know that sounds insane on top of it, but it is so doable. And I love what Nana is saying. If I think about sort of the total commitment to the Mission Continues in the board meetings, right? In a year, if you think about it, it's like a 24, maybe 48-hour commitment, 2 days, right? Out of 365 in its totality. I can't think of a better ROI those 2 days, right? To be able to shape programming, how we think about things, having conversations around diversity, equity, inclusion, and what that means for people who opt into the program, who touch the Mission Continues brand. So if you're ever thinking like, because I don't like to take time away from my kids, I'm like, I get paid 9 to 6. These are my other commitments because I care about that. And I want to know 20 years from now, my babies are going to have a better, right? Like experience growing up in this country. So that's kind of how I pick where I spend my time. But I have to tell you, can't think of a better way to spend a day of your life, like in its total, and knowing that you're having incredible impact. So if that sounds appealing to you, you're in the right place.
Yeah, fantastic, right? Yeah, like get the application out, please. And I think both of you touched on some really interesting points. I just kind of want to just dive a little deeper, just to clear it up a little bit. And it's this notion of how do you choose, right? Like I mean, you both are extremely accomplished women, and I'm sure that your email gets flooded because not only are you just accomplished, but you're personable, you're thought-provoking and strategic. So you bring tremendous value. So I know that, I'm sure your email is blowing up from people saying, please be a member of our board and please participate in this and please, consider us for this. How do you decide when and you talked about, what's meaningful to you and kind of tying into like this idea of where am I going to spend my time to have the greatest impact? But for somebody who might not be used to that type of engagement, what are some things that you kind of go through the process in terms of kind of sifting through the choices that you have in order to settle on, the organizations that you decided to invest your time and talent to?
Sure, I'd love to take a stab at that. So when I first started thinking about board service, I really was like a lot of people I admired were on boards, and I was like, oh, I think it's about time I go do that. And so I picked a cause that checked off a couple boxes of the things that I cared about the most. And I found it wasn't a great experience. I was like, not actually that psyched to be on the board. And what I learned from that was not only do you have to like care about the organization, but you actually have to look at like the structure of the board. And that's really important. So this board had something like 45 people on it, which is insanity. Like that should have been like my first warning, kind of like when the inspector comes to your house and is like, that looks like a water stain up there, right? Like, and you just don't buy the house. So I was like, wow, this is interesting. Well, the way it was pitched to me was like, well, we have, so many donors and people that love the organization. And so over the time, there was no discipline on the board. And so you had people who had given money and now they were just part of the board. And so it was a lot of like dead weight. It wasn't really that helpful. And then the board and the organization had like a little bit of a challenging relationship, right? So there were all these different factors that I just didn't know enough to know to ask. So I will say, like, when you're choosing, one of the things to think about is like, hey, like, how big is the board? And then you're like, well, how big is too big? Well, like 45 is too big, right? And 6 may be too small, depending on the size of the organization, right? Because you're going to want to start divvying up responsibilities and maybe having committees. Like if it's just too small, you may end up doing like everything. But if it's a really small organization, maybe you're only doing like a small piece, right? So there is no like answer, but it's just something you have to do in the calculus of like, how is it that you're going to choose something? Because when I first chose something, I didn't actually think about any of that. I was like, this is amazing. This organization deals with immigrants, and like, you know, my parents are immigrant, like I'm loving this. And then the whole structure of it was just not enjoyable at all. I would say the other thing is like I kind of started in the beginning, is like real connection to something. So like I have real like passion for the idea of like literacy and hunger, children's, you know, all sorts of things. And I have like danced around those organizations like a lot. And it's only ever ended up being like volunteer opportunities. Like I haven't actually been able to like get myself like riled up to do like the board stuff. And it's not to say that those things aren't important to me, but there is something about this sort of like alum type connection with like veterans in my alma mater that at least motivated me. Not everybody's like that. So I, again, don't take that as like the rule of thumb, but I will say that there are probably a few things, you know, once you get past like the appreciation of being asked, you know, and some of the shiny objects when maybe you're trying to decide for yourself, that you kind of sit down if you're being really quiet and say like, does this work for me? And recently, actually, a good example, I had someone who asked me to be on their board, and it's like a sports thing, and there was a whole gender thing going, and it, you know, he was like, you would be great. Like, I can't, this was the best. I can't do this without you. What? Right? So there was like all of this stuff. But when in the final analysis, like, I don't follow that sport. Like, yeah, I'm all about like gender equality, but like this was just the wrong way for me to give back. And so I just had to very politely say, like, I just don't, this wouldn't be, I'm not going to be the most impactful for you, right? Like, it's great. There's a lot of boxes that I may check for you, but like, when we go sit and have dinner with donors and I don't really understand the sport that we're supposed to be talking about, like that's actually going to be more of a hurt for you, right? And so there's a lot of, it all sounds like common sense, but when you're trying to decide, everything's going to sound great. And it's up to you to kind of say like, am I the type of person that engages in this organization, like in the way that I'm watching other people engage, or when they describe how they do stuff, right? Like, it's just like a job interview. You have to think about how you kind of slot in. So it's a long answer, but it's not a science. And that's what I didn't realize. I approached choosing a nonprofit to serve on its board like a science. And it's so much more an art because it hits you in the heart. It really does.
Gotcha. Sally, do you have anything that you want to kind of expand upon, kind of your approach in how to, again, siphon through, you know, a lot of the requests for your talent and your time to sit on boards?
Yeah, I mean, I get asked quite a bit, but I think it's also because I sit at Warner Brothers where people are like, I need your celebrities, I need your connections. And I'm like, that's all great. And sometimes I may sit on a board just in a very like functional capacity to help an organization kind of further what they do. And it helps our CSR efforts. Anything I sit on personally, it's like, I always start with my identity and values, right? What is it about how I exist in this world? What identity markers matter to me? And how do I see myself either adding to that conversation or just doing the work, frankly, right? Because it's volunteer, right? Work. I know people think sitting on a board, it is different, I guess, the role, but it's still volunteer work. And so it's like exactly what Nana's saying, whether it's a job interview or buying your house, like, or your first home car, like, do you see yourself in it? Do you see yourself, like, how does that scenario play out for you? Because when you have a board meeting and other things come up, you should feel excited about attending that meeting and not like, oh, I have to sit in a 4-hour Zoom meeting. Like, if you're already feeling that way, like, again, respectfully, politely decline, because something is not connecting with your kind of inner spirit and where you feel like you really should be. and it's a choice, right? You're opting in. It might not be the right time for you. So I think depending on your individual like factors and what's going on in your life, there's a timing aspect to it that I wanted to mention.
Awesome. So as we get close to kind of,
sorry,
I
love that about your identity markers. I think that's the most elegant way of talking about like how you can. I love that. Yeah.
Fantastic. All right, so we have about 9 minutes left for the session, and I do have a really great Q&A question that I want to pose to you. And I think this kind of goes to kind of the work that the board does and kind of explaining like, okay, what does a board actually do for an organization? So 2020, pandemic, a lot of pivoting. What were some strategic decisions the board engaged with to assist the organization in dealing with 2020? That'll probably be the first question, and a kind of follow on to that is specifically like, and then how do you see those decisions kind of moving forward into 2021 as we kind of now rounding a you know, I don't want to say a curve, I don't want to say that, but as we might be landing this plane, so to speak, right? I think it's a little bit better as we're landing this plane of the pandemic. But those are kind of the questions I think we have. It's kind of like the work that the board did. I mean, of course, last summer, you know, with the notion of social justice and everything that we had to deal with, you know, in protesting and things of that nature. So I'm just curious, like what, you know, how are you involved as board members in helping the Mission Continues navigate those choppy waters?
Yeah. So, you know, what I'll say is you have to remember that a board is counsel, right? Like we don't run the organization. That's actually not our function. We're there to give perspective. We're there to give guidance based on expertise and experience areas that we have that the leadership team doesn't have. And that's really our goal. And so when the team, you know, came to us with the changes that were happening, the social unrest, the inability to gather, which has really been like the hallmark of what we do. You know, they had some ideas for us on how they could pivot, how they could continue to keep us relevant, how they could continue to keep us relevant. And when I say keep us relevant to like our veterans, right? Like that's really what was important. Like if we somehow weren't able to serve all of you, then it wouldn't have worked. Right. And by serving you, then we serve our communities. Right. So it was, you know, it was like a chain. And so we're here to listen. I mean, they have views, right. And they have a leadership team and they have all of the folks that work at the organization that have thoughts. And so, you know, they're paid to kind of sift through all that stuff and come up with those plans. And we really are counsel. And so I like to think that some of the things that you're seeing that are playing out as far as just, you know, some of the, you know, like you said, some of the sunsetting and the moving on to different programs and like how we think about leadership and continued professional development and all of those things are things that absolutely we've heard about. And oftentimes conversations are like, that sounds like a good idea, right? You know, think about this, this, and this. And other times we want to challenge them and make sure that they've got all the information because maybe we've been through something similar, right? Like you've got folks who've got big operational jobs and, you know, all sorts of stuff that can offer that counsel and some of that advice. And so I would say that 2020 was definitely one of those years where we were close. We were very close because there were just a lot of new conversations that were happening, and it took more people thinking about them. And so, yeah, as you can imagine, it was tough, but I feel like we're in a good spot. We got folks to the other side, and I hear you, we're landing the plane. I'm not calling victory yet, but I'm actually really excited about the pivots and about how the organization really rose to the challenge, quite honestly.
Yeah. Thank you, Nana. And Sally, I think to your question, because, you know, you have such a 20 years of experience in social impact and DEI and things of that nature, which is a critical point. How has that experience, right? You've invested a lot of time, energy, and effort into honing your skill. how has your experience and knowledge been beneficial to the board? How have you used that 20 years of work to make that 30-second decision, right? I think that's a quote someone said. It's like, I didn't make that decision in 30 seconds, 20 years of experience that gave me that 30-second decision. So I just want to kind of ask, kind of you that question, like how have you seen your experience be a contribution to the board and to the organization?
Yeah, I think oftentimes, right, like you're like, yes, 20 years of experience, and then you go into a new environment, you're like, I don't know, I'm not a veteran. Like, what am I going to add to this conversation? Those were legitimate thoughts that went through my mind at the first board meeting. I'm sitting there and I'm like just in awe, but then I was like, okay, what's going to happen? But then you'll hear familiar language, right? Where we're talking about philanthropy, community, and I'm like, wait, I know what they're talking about here. And I think that's what happens in any environment, whether it's a job, in personal circles, just any new environment, you're always sort of feeling out, right? What's going on and how you opt in and how you show up. And then you'll start to hear something that you're like, wait, I know I know this conversation. I know how I can add my perspective to it. And I think even, I'm sure during the alumni program, right, there's always that sort of like settling process where you just try to understand kind of your groove, what you want to share. And so I think if you treat kind of your experience and that first time joining a board in a similar fashion, appreciate that there will be a few nerves, there will be things that feel unfamiliar, but pretty soon you'll realize, oh, this is why they asked me. This is the perspective that I can bring to the table. And it depends on the topic. And we'll see it at every board meeting. Certain topics just bring something out in folks because people are like, I have something to say. And this is how my experience lends credibility to what I'm offering to this conversation. Other times people might be quiet, just they're there to observe and to really learn, like Nana was saying, as much about you adding as you are learning in this whole process. Yeah.
Well, I can't thank you both enough for just taking this time to just really share your experience and your knowledge. And I think it was extremely insightful to hear, how you navigate, being on a board. And I know for some of our alumni, it might be a bit overwhelming to kind of put your foot out there and throw your hat into the ring. And I just want to encourage all the alumni, like, listen, just do it, right? If you're scared, do it scared. Just get it done, get your application in. It is, my experience being on board, I'm sitting next to, executives from Lennar home builders, right? And it's like, you don't know what that handshake might lead to, right? And it's not, you don't do it for that, but you at least know you and this other person have a common interest and a common heart for the cause that you're sitting on this board together, and you're invested in it together. So I want to say thank you so much for your time. I want to bring Talisa on. She has some announcements in the final minute. I left her a minute so she can wrap up this event. But Nana, Sally, thank you so much. Thank you so very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Derek. Echoing the same sentiments. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Sala, Nana, and Derek for hosting and facilitating today's panel. For all of the alum that are viewing right now and those that will review this session at a later date. So if any of your battles, if any of your fellow alumni friends missed today, do let them know that this is recorded, and we will send out an announcement as soon as we have it uploaded to our Charlie Mike channel. If you didn't know, we do have a YouTube channel, and it is very educational and insightful. We have a lot of great content on our Charlie Mike channel, so be sure to check that out. I just wanted to let you all know that this conversation is at the perfect time as we are getting ready to promote some upcoming leadership opportunities to really engage the next wave of alumni leaders here at the Mission Continues. So for those that did join today and or registered, you will be the first to be notified next week when we make public the leadership opportunities that we are going to have for our alumni. Including the opportunity to apply for our National Board of Directors, where you would be joining both Nana and Sally. The opportunity to apply to be on our Alumni Advisory Council, or applying to be a program ambassador. And so the details, how to apply, the description of all of those leadership opportunities will be on our Alumni Network webpage, which I posted the link in the chat. I will also include that in our email communications efforts. And as those that are active in our Facebook group page, I often post things there first as well. So once again, thank you, Derek. Thank you, Sally. Thank you, Nana. Thank you, Mary Beth. And thank you to the team that made today's event possible. We look forward to seeing you rather in the virtual world or in person sometime soon. Until then, Charlie Mike. Bye, y'all.